Good afternoon. Welcome to this month's edition of our Business Exit Planning series. My name is John Daly. With me is Ted Bachman and Dane Byers. The program is going to take just about an hour, and this week's program is going to be on 3 case studies. And for this, I am going to turn it over to Ted.
John in the chat is saying some technical difficulty.
Okay, let me check one more thing here. Things should be right on this end, and I know you're remote today, which makes things a challenge. So Ted, we'll have to just stay in touch via our cell phone, and I will do the introductions and things from here.
Okay, very good. And I'll give you a reminder on keywords. I'm sorry,
Perfect.
this is a real technical glitch, but we'll work it out.
Thanks, Ted.
Thank you. Oh. John, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
How about that? I'm going to hang up the phone then, John. And so everybody, we apologize for these technical difficulties that we've had here. That's why we got on early and still couldn't figure it out. But some of the key things you'll need to know is for your CPE credit is that you will learn how to apply strategies discussed in earlier webinars to real examples. We're going to go through some case studies here. Strategies include tax mitigation, negotiating best practices, combining estate planning with the sale of the primary asset. And these are things we need to read to you. And that's why I know you can read it, but I need to do it so we make sure we get CPE credit. To be awarded the full CPE credit, you'll be required to record up to 3 polling questions, which will give you keywords, keywords, excuse me, provided at random during each credit hour on the program. These keywords will be collected from each participant following the course, and then you would submit that at the end. John, if you would move it. Next slide, please, John.
There we go.
Here we go. Okay. So CPE, basic information, it's business management and organization, no advanced material. Array Partners is registered with the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy as a sponsor of continuing professional education on National Registry of CPE sponsors. State Boards of Accountancies have final authority on the acceptance of individual courses for CPE credit. Complaints regarding registered sponsors may be submitted to the National Registry of CPE sponsors through this website. And John, if you would advance the next slide, please. Just a quick background. Rather than my reading everything here to you, I've known John for a while now, and he's just been very impressive and knowledgeable in this area. This is one of the things he does. As you can see, he's entered into financial services in 1981, technical training at an American college in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania, not far from where I grew up. And John was named to the prestigious Who's Who in Financial Services. Recognizing the need for a better deliverable, John partnered with his longtime friend and confidant, Michael Began, to design a team-based model that would allow business and financial advice to be delivered to clients via a holistic process rather than having advice segmented by professional designations. The result of many years of research and trial and error is Array Partners, who's putting on this presentation today. This is a team-based virtual family office. John and his wife Beverly raised their children on the coast of Maine. As empty nesters, they relocated to Sarasota, Florida in 2008 to be near their aging parents. Beverly fell in love with the beaches and art, while John took advantage of the wonderful weather and found a new passion participating in triathlons. He has raced all distances and completed his first 140.6 mile race in 2014. John, if you would. And Dane Beyer is another person here from the Raleigh area. A number of you people are from Raleigh. I got to know him a number of years ago also through the FANG, Financial Executive Networking Group. Dane is the owner of Dane Beyer CPA PLLC and was formerly a shareholder and partner in charge of the Raleigh office of the firm Nelson and Company CPAs for 17 years, and at Bassett and Byers CPA for PA for 5 years. The firm's corporate activities included taxation, succession planning, audit, and assurance services, valuation, and merger and acquisition consulting. Dane's been an excellent resource in that, especially this presentation that he's putting on is right down his alley. He is extremely good in succession planning and exit planning. Dane also founded an internet-based financial services company in 2000, which he successfully sold. So he knows a little something about selling companies even for himself. Dane is a frequent speaker on valuation and acquisitions, divestiture topics, and has presented as a guest professional business valuation and other financial topics at the MBA schools at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, INSEAD University in Singapore, the Robert P. Hill School of Management at the University of Maryland, and the MBA school at the University of California, San Diego. In addition to many seminars, Dane has also presented CLE courses to attorney organizations, engineering organizations, and others on valuation and other topics. You can see from his credentials, he's got a BS from University of Florida, certified public accountant in North Carolina, an accredited ABV, business valuation from the AICPA, certified financial forensics, CFF, from the AICPA also, and he's also a real estate broker. How about that? So, John.
Thank you, Ted. So the format today is going to be a little bit different than prior ones. What we decided to do was we took 3 cases that we've been worked on in the last few years and kind of laid them out with a fact pattern. Then we're going to talk about what we might be able to do to resolve this. And then at the end, we will circle back and tell you what we actually did. So the first company, and Ted, I think this is where we insert the first keyword.
That's exactly where it's heading. Thank you. The first keyword is insider, not insider trading, just plain insider.
Perfect. So the first transaction we're going to talk about is an HVAC company. And transaction is probably a poor choice of words because oftentimes exit planning starts years before a business actually changes hands. And that was the case with this particular company. The owner in question was single, he's divorced, he's in his early 60s. He has an adult son who lives 2 time zones away and runs his own business. He has several long-term employees. He would consider his company to be a legacy for the local community. He started the business right out of high school and built it up to be a pretty successful company. They now, I want to say they employ about 24 in a small town. The company is very profitable and is aggressive and kind of informal with their accounting practices. So that's kind of the lay of the land with this particular company. So let's talk about questions that you folks might think that we would want to ask this person, or other information that you'd need to be able to complete a thought for this. You can just type your thoughts right in in the chat area. And while you're doing that, Dane, I'm going to ask you to chime in a little bit and see what you have for ideas here.
Yeah,
While Dane is resolving his microphone problem there, just for your help, folks, if you type questions in the chat area, I'll be monitoring that and one of us will make sure that we get them to the speaker. So just use the chat box for your questions. Thank you.
all right, is that better?
Really?
All right, hang on. All right, how about now?
I think we have an echo canyon here.
Okay, well, Dane continues to work on that a little bit, a little additional color on this particular case. The company has been structured very loosely over the years. They have 3 key managers, and rather than having any type of a formal structure, they've just kind of divvied up responsibilities towards interests or particular clients. The company gets about 70% of its revenue from repeat customers. They do a lot of institutional style work. So the key people are estimators as well as customer service folks. So with this kind of a company, and at this point, the owner is in his early 60s. He has no desire to leave the business right now, as he puts it, because I come in, I work for 3 to 5 hours a day, and then I go do my hobbies, and life is pretty good. So, and it really is a bit of a cash cow. So he doesn't have the desire to sell it right now, but he wants the business to remain a going concern when he's gone. So with that kind of a thinking, does anybody have any thoughts for other questions or strategies that we might want to kick around, or experiences along these lines? And right now, it looks like the chat is still blank. So this is the awkward part, where this is the participation phase of the program. And for you guys to get real value out of it, I mean, Dane and I are going to fill our slots, but it would be helpful if you guys would participate as well. Dane, how are you doing with your microphone? Folks, having given literally thousands of in-person talks, I can tell you that the awkward silence phase on a webinar is much harder to deal with than it is in live case. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you a little bit of some of the things that we try to do within this particular case. Now, as with all of our business exit planning, we start with a assessment of the company and an informal valuation. The difference between an informal valuation and a formal valuation is, one, we are not doing any type of forensic work on the books. We're accepting the books at face value. And secondly, we are not doing an in-depth local or unique market analysis. If we were listing this to go to public sale, at some point we would have to dig in much deeper, but this is very much of an analytical valuation. At the same time, we look at key performance indicators to get a general idea for the value of this company. And I want to say that this company formally pegged in at about 50% of what the owner expected the worth to be. And it was underperforming in several key indicators. Now, in this particular case, it's my belief that I personally think that the owner's sense of the value of the company was pretty much spot on. But because of the informal accounting structures that they used, it wasn't reflective in the books, and the informal valuation that we use is very analytical heavy. And if, you know, instead of owner comp, the company paid for, you know, the owner's truck, or it gave, you know, instead of giving an executive a cash bonus, it paid for them to, you know, take a trip somewhere, whatever the case may be. So the books were off a little bit like that. And the takeaway for you folks is, you know, if somebody really wants to get full value for their company, you have to really start about 3 years in advance by cleaning up the book so that you have 3 solid years of bulletproof accounting. Whether it's a lender or a bank or a sophisticated buyer, they're not going to accept, you know, the good old boy, you know, yes, this, you know, we really made this much, but we paid out this and we did that. And, you know, we just didn't want to pay Uncle Sam his part. You know, they don't accept that. So you'll have to accept a reduction. I know we've talked about it before. But in this particular case, we were able to enter into a personal, you know, buy-sell agreement that didn't involve outside financing on the front end. So the first thing that we did was we looked to formalize the relationship of the different managers. Within that formalization, we brought in a part-time CFO, and by part-time I mean the CFO probably spent 5 hours a quarter on this company. We did bring in a QuickBooks specialist to work with them to clean up the accounting side of things. But what the remote CFO was really doing was reviewing the numbers with the management team and teaching them, you know, what to look for, how to read a financial statement, and basically how to become owners. The second piece that we did in this particular case was that we put together an incentive program where over the course of 3 years, we set financial targets. And over the course of 3 years, each of the 3 key management had the ability to be awarded up to 8% of the ownership of the company based on growth. So the company was grossing around 13 million. Our goal was to get it at 20, you know, up to 20. And if that happened, you know, the current owner's position would really not have changed, but the managers would effectively own the growth. The other thing that allowed us to do is it began to build an ownership track record so that if the executives or the owner wanted to get out earlier, they now have the track record and the infrastructure in place to get third-party financing. As combined 24% owners with a you know 3 to 5 year track record of ownership in the company, they would be qualified to get an SBA loan or something along those lines so that they could secure the capital necessary to buy the owner out if the owner reached a point where he just didn't want to put in his 5 hours a day anymore. Hang on one second. Let me see what the rest of my notes say here. The other thing that we did was we purchased a key man policy on the owner and executed a buy-sell agreement in the event of death, where the estate of the owner would redeem the company's shares in exchange for the cash. So the hope was that, you know, should something happen to the owner prematurely, they would have the capital to do the buyout. And our hope is that they'll have enough of an education, or they'll be able to rely on the remote CFO enough to, you know, to accelerate their education process on being an instructor and get them up to speed to running the company, so that the company continues to employ the 24 people locally and they're able to continue to support the local charitable causes and so forth. The cost of the key man insurance was covered by a portion of the increased revenue set by the growth plan of the 3 executives. So at the end of the day, The family gets the value of the company. The management team gets the opportunity to run the company. The 24 people get to keep their jobs. The Little League team continues to get, to keep its sponsor, and hopefully everybody lives happily ever after. Dane, have you had a chance to work out your your audio issues yet? I'm going to take that as a no. So now let's go to the next one. Oh, hang on one second for me, folks. Okay. This is kind of an interesting one. This company is they produce educational material for advanced study books. Think course material to to sit for a CPA exam, for example. They're kind of specialized in that space. They've been in that space a long time. They received an unsolicited offer from a mergers and acquisitions firm for $18 million. The owner reached out to us. He was actually a personal wealth management client of ours. He reached out to us asking if we could help him with the negotiations. I don't know if anyone has ever been involved with the negotiations with an M&A firm. Just do me a quick favor and indicate in the chat whether you've ever been involved with either on the buy or the sell side with an M&A firm.
And John, while they're doing that, I will hit the second key word today is external, as in an external sale.
Okay, so you have the second keyword of external, and the results look like none of you have ever participated in negotiations with an M&A firm.
Bob says yes, Bob Herford, and so does Andrew Messick.
Okay, perfect. Sorry about that. I jumped the gun.
Yes.
Oh, that's okay. And we have, so the roll call, so the count is 2 yeses and 2 nos.
Okay.
Can you hear me, John?
I can now. Thank you, Dane.
Way to go, Dane.
Okay.
So when you work with an M&A firm, they basically buy companies for a living, and they have their process and their infrastructure set in a methodology that allows them to process the information on a particular business in a structure that works for them. And one of the old adages in representing a seller is you provide the buyer what they're asking for in the format they're asking for and nothing else. It's up to them to do, we're not going to hide anything from a due diligence perspective, but we're not going to, to take them by the hand and lead them down the primrose path either, nor do we want to give them full access to everything, unless they ask for it. And I bring that up because, I don't know why, but it seems like the best or the most popular months for unsolicited sale offers are March, April, and September, October. And if you folks are in the accounting business, that is prime tax season, and the CPA is already working 80, 90, 100-hour weeks, and asking them to do another layer on top of that for this one-off transaction is really hard to get. It's really hard to get their attention. In this particular case, the M&A firm asked for the information, the financials in a very specific format, like you upload the 2018 financials labeled 2018 financials, and then you load the 2019 P&L and so on and so on and so on. Well, the CPA in question simply did a one-time dump of everything, which the M&A firm says this is so you now have 3 years financials in a single file for the, for the M&A firm, which doesn't sound like a big deal unless you're the one that has the process in place to orderly transact this. And when the M&A firm pushed back, the answer that the CPA gave them, and this was on a group call, but the CPA didn't work for us, and he has his own opinion on things. He just said, well, how about if I just give you an access to the backup of the financials and you can look at whatever you want? Okay. That's not what you want to do, because what that did was that opened up a whole nother layer of questions and created a lot more work and a lot more potential for the sale to go sideways. Fortunately, in this case, what we did was we hired our own M&A firm to represent the owner in the negotiations. The way that we priced our M&A firm is that they received a pittance by their standards for the basic negotiations, but they would receive 10% of anything that they could sell the company for above 18 million. So the M&A firm did help us with the review and the recasting. They helped us with the information. They helped us in reviewing, the 468-page, offer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And ultimately, we ended up settling on a price that was somewhere around 21 million. I don't remember exactly, but it was 21.3 or something like that, plus an additional 3 million deferred payment that was conditional upon the company continuing to hit a couple of numbers. So that's how we handled the negotiation side of things. Taxes were a big issue in this particular case. The owner had 2 years earlier had relocated from South Carolina to California, was kind of surprised at how much more expensive it was to live there, and a lot of that had to do with the tax structure within the state. So we were trying to mitigate as much of the taxes as we possibly could. Ownership in this case was structured around a C corporation formula. So we had a couple of different tax brackets to work with. Now, last month, we talked about some of the different tax mitigation strategies. One of the strategies we talked about was a charitable LLC or a CLLC. This involves gifting an asset to a single member LLC, converting that to a partnership with a charity. You retain control of the investments, but the charity has 99% of the ultimate corpus. And that creates, basically negates the tax on 99% of whatever you put in the CLLC. One of the ways that we get the monies out of the CLLC is we do it with a low interest loan based on the applicable federal rate and collateralized with a life insurance policy. The idea being is that we'll pay the 1.2% interest annually, and then ultimately, at the death of the owner, the trust gets adequate money to relinquish the lien that the charity has on it. The charity has their money, the family still has theirs. We saved $1 million in taxes, and everybody lives happily ever after. In this particular case, there were some health issues, and we were only able to secure about $8 million of death benefit on an affordable basis. So of the $20 million, $8 million went into the CLLC, which left $12 million exposed to taxes. Our recommendation on that was to do a deferred sales agreement. This is a fairly new and innovative approach. It's actually been around for about 20 years and used in a very narrow scope. With a deferred sales agreement, what happens is that instead of the client receiving the money directly, it goes to an intermediary that manages it on the client's behalf. The client can still receive an income stream off the portfolio, do what they want, and then it passes through to their heirs at a stepped up basis at death. the same CPA that just turned over unsolicited copies of the books vetoed this strategy because it was new to him and he didn't have time to research it. He's also the trusted advisor of the client. So the client is going to end up, of his $21 million transaction, we saved 30% tax on $8 million of it. The rest of it is going to be taxed as long-term capital gain. So, the bill was $3 million instead of $5 million. Not the best outcome, but it wasn't the worst outcome either. Dane, what would you have done differently with that, with those set of facts?
Not really a whole lot. I think the problem with what the CPA did is that's technically illegal. That's breaching client confidentiality. So that's not good. But I don't necessarily know all the facts there. It is a pretty complex way to set things up. And I know when you were going through this, you didn't just do it in 5 minutes or 10 minutes like you just did. It evolved over time. I think the other thing to keep in mind too is, originally Biden said he wasn't going to change taxes on inheritance. Now he is. So all these strategies could become moot really in months. So definitely, be something that you're going to have to be able to be flexible and keep your eye on as you go. And make changes as you get through it, because what you came up with yesterday may not be applicable tomorrow.
That's a great point. The strategy that we used in this case for the shelter that we were able to do, that structure was actually put in place 2 years ago for current income mitigation strategy. But going forward, part of that strategy uses a defective inheritors trust, and that is one of the strategies that's supposedly in the crosshairs of Congress now. I'm not sure exactly how that's all going to work out, but having future flexibility is certainly important. You're absolutely right. The installment sale type of a process using an intermediary doesn't appear to be on anybody's radar. So I don't think that that's going to be an issue. But clearly anything using, a defective trust or an inheritors trust, you're going to want to pay close attention. We may have to be redoing some things. Anybody else have any thoughts out there? Go ahead and talk about it.
Yeah, I've got a client, very big company, huge, about $500 million, and we were trying to use a strategy like this, and he refused to only because the trust had the word defective in it, and he was convinced that meant something bad.
Okay, now, it's educating the client is it's a constant source of amazement to me. When we sit down with the clients and we do the surveys, and they all say they want to save taxes, but they're not willing to embrace the strategies to do it. So I'm not sure how they expect us to be able to save the taxes if we can't use the tools that are permissible under the law. And a defective inheritors trust, all that simply means is that the beneficiary, usually the monies comes from a source outside of the beneficiary. Like that, that's how we do. So in this case, the trust is opened by somebody friendly to the client, with a small amount, $5,000 or something like that. And then the rest of the trust is funded via a loan from the charitable structure and collateralized with a life insurance policy. It's a strategy we've probably used 60 times in the last decade. It works really, really well. It's been reviewed numerous times and never challenged. but you do have to have a client who is willing to have, who's willing to have an open-minded conversation. And the challenge with a lot of like an unsolicited offer like this is that the timeline is fairly compressed. And instead of having, 2 or 3 or 5 years to help a client warm up to a innovative or lesser known strategy, is out the window, and it gets rolled into, the tax consequences get rolled into all the stress of the potential transaction. And in this particular case, this is the company that he started in his garage. So he has zero basis in the 18 million, and yeah, he makes $1 million a year on it. But all of a sudden ending up with, having to pay $5 million in taxes is still more money than he imagined it would be worth when he started the thing. So it certainly is a challenge to get clients to understand and accept some of the more complicated strategies. Okay, I don't see any other questions or comments popped up in the chat. Ted, do you see anything?
No, I don't, John. And one thing, it sounds like you're getting ready to move on to the next case. Is that right?
Uh-huh.
Before we do that, I'd like to maybe make a suggestion, since Dane had some technical difficulties with his microphone and audio. There might be something in the first case study that Dane wanted to add to what you have. And then Dane, I know I'm putting you on the spot here, and I know that John did a good job covering it, but I just wanted to make sure we didn't walk away with maybe a word of wisdom that you had for us.
And Ted, that is why we love you on this call. Thank you.
Yeah, actually, I did have something that, this came up in real life when I first started doing this. We would typically plan to make the managers part of the company or give them some of the upside so that they would stick around if it was going to be that kind of sale. And one of the things that came up is, well, what is move number one? Like the day you walk in and tell and the day you walk in with the idea that this is what you're going to do. If you just, come up to a manager and say, hey, I want to sell the company and I'm going to make you good, or we're going to, start making all these changes. And I brought in this consultant, which might as well be the devil. But we brought in this consultant to make everything look good. They're probably going to get a little nervous, because management doesn't think of things the way that owners do. Management is always, no matter how close they are, they're always kind of leery. They get a little bit nervous about their job, whereas an owner doesn't, because he can't get fired or get replaced. So what are the tactics? What is the very first thing you do on day one when you walk in?
Okay.
In terms of making management, agreeable and not so nervous. Assuming you want to keep management, but.
Yeah, and in this case, we met with the owner 3 or 4 times, before we agreed on a course of action. And those 3 or 4 meetings were frankly over the course of a year. He's busy. When we had time, he was out of the country, all these kinds of things. When we first presented the concept to the owner or to the managers, we actually did it in the owner's office. And we can do it, in the office, offsite, whatever. And the owner started the conversation with saying, boys, I'm not getting any younger. This company's been my life. You guys are my family. And I want to make sure it continues if something happens to me. So setting the stage for the transition is absolutely critical, Dane. You're right. And that's how we coached the owner to start the conversation. And then from there, it was all about, we want to prep you guys to assume the full leadership mantle when the owner doesn't want, either is not able to or doesn't want to anymore. And that's how we positioned it here from the get-go. So we were able to keep everything on the down low. Part of their informal accounting structure meant that the owner had everything. He didn't have to rely on anybody to give us any information. So literally nobody knew who we were or why we were there. Vendors come in and out of the place all the time. So for those of you that know me, my hourly or my daily rate is increased by $1,500 a day if you want me to show up in a suit and a tie. So, I'm in an HVAC in khakis and a shirt, golf shirt in the summer, long sleeve shirt in the winter. So I just look like any other vendor showing up. And it just made for, the owner being able to set the stage that way made things a whole lot easier. It is certainly more challenging when the owner doesn't have his finger on the pulse as well and have to rely on outside people to pull in information, because then you have to deal with the rumor mill. And it's really hard to deal with the rumor mill until we've put together a plan that's going to make it work. So usually how I've come in with this is, in a situation like that is I'm working for the family on their estate plan. And we've got to figure out we've got to figure out how to value the company, what's going on here as part of the estate planning process, which is a stretch, but it's not a lie, because this was clearly
Right.
part of his estate plan. And, fortunately with a name like Array Partners, it's easy for me to morph into whatever I want to be. It would be much harder if my name was, Brokers Are Us, we sell companies. That's a lot harder to hide or mask what it is, why you're there initially until we're ready to disclose a real plan.
Okay.
So that's how we did it with this particular company. I can tell you, I also had another company in the greater Charlotte area, where the owner, we laid out a plan, and the way we do things is we do the evaluation first, and then we put together an implementation strategy, and they're separate fees. So we charge $2,500 on the front end, and the implementation fee is going to depend on what it is we have to do. And that particular strategy was also going to be an inside transaction, similar to how this one was structured. And we laid it out, and the owner, I think we were charging $25,000 to do the implementation phase, which included, setting the benchmarks and the strength and weaknesses assessment of the controller who we had targeted to assume the ownership. Somewhere between our conversation and our handshake agreement, the owner's wife decided that $25,000 was way too much and they could do it in-house. So the last I heard, obviously they're no longer a client and I no longer have any engagement there, but the last I heard, the controller left to a competitor. So that we had the initial conversation about an ownership, and then there was no follow through, which created a lot of dissatisfaction, and it cost them a key employee. So how you position it does have, you have to be careful. Any other thoughts, Dane?
No, that's good.
Okay. Now let me get back to.
Okay. John, at this point is time for keyword number 3, and that is, the word is family. This is a family affair. Okay.
Okay. So sale number 3 is kind of interesting in that it involved the sale of an S Corp. Before we got involved, they had already accepted an offer of $2 million for the business and $800,000 for the building. So our role was to basically provide tax mitigation advice. So if you have an S corporation and his salary or his profit year to date was somewhere right around $1 million. So if you have an S corporation where the owner has already pulled out, $1 million, you've got this purchase agreement in place. The company has about $300,000 in cash and another $100,000 in receivables. What are some of your thoughts for how do we mitigate the taxes on this transaction? Dane, we either intimidate the heck out of them, or this is the first time any of them have ever sold a company. I don't know which. I have
Yeah.
a feeling that they just want to know what we know.
Yeah.
So, Dane, why don't we start with you then? What would you do here?
Oh, let's see here. Well, one of the things I would try to do is see if we can get any personal goodwill into this, so that we're not. And I'm assuming this is going to be an asset sale.
I'm sorry, this
if
is
we
an
can-
asset sale, and we were able to shave a couple $100,000 on the goodwill side.
Okay, so yeah, that's one of the easy low hanging fruit, is grab some personal goodwill off of it. The SBA loan could be an issue, although for a fee, those are usually transferable. Anything that's on the building, you're going to have depreciation recapture. Not a huge way around that unless we're, going to do something interesting with maybe some trusts or something like that. And who is he selling to? This open market?
Open market.
Okay. So there might be some seller financing. I would look at that because you're going to make more money on seller financing. But with the SBA loan, that's going to make it tougher because it's kind of hard to, to do seller financing and include that in there. Pretty young guy. So, depending on what his goal is for the sale, does he just want a lump of money and drop it into the market somewhere, or does he want this to, basically pay out an annuity for him? But
when I met with this gentleman, he has he's kind of a serial entrepreneur, and he has a handful of other business ideas that have just been percolating. So his plan will be to roll this into a passive investment strategy. The other investment ideas require minimal cash flow on his side. When we got involved, the buyer had already secured their financing. So I didn't even broach the idea of him taking paper instead.
Okay. All right.
I'm a firm believer in cash in the hand is way better than a promissory note on a company you're not involved in anymore.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So there might be some interesting 1031 moves you could make, depending on what the goal is and what the setup is. And if he's looking at starting something or investing in something that's already there, again, you would have to watch out for the passive versus active classification for the 1031. But that's kind of where I would start. But I know you got pretty complex with this one too.
Yeah, actually, we did. And the fact pattern here is a little misleading because he actually bought the building in February of this year. So he only had the $600,000 basis. So he has about $200,000 a gain in there. What we ended up doing was we used the CLLC strategy in this case. Now, for you tax geeks, remember that the way the CLLC strategy works is that we create a single member LLC, and then we convert it to a partnership with a charity. A partnership can't own an S corp. So on the surface, we can't do, the full tax mitigation strategy. What we did instead was we did a hybrid, kind of a two-step process, and it was really interesting that Dane brought up the 1031 as an alternative or an option within the building. The way a 1031 transaction works is at sale, the funding does not go to the seller, it goes to an intermediary. The intermediary holds that money for a predetermined number of days, and then it either has to be reinvested into a different structure, or basically the note comes due. If you haven't bought something else, the note comes due and you have to pay it back to the owner, and he's responsible for all the taxes on any, just like any other transaction. So with this particular case, what we did was we had the funding go to an intermediary. And, so now the S corporation gave the assets, the 2.2 million of assets to, the buyer in exchange for this promissory note. That's how the 1031s actually work. So that was day one. Day two, the seller, my client, traded his shares in the S corp for the promissory note. So now he has the promissory note, but he doesn't have constructive receipt. And there's no tax consequences of any of this because the S corp is a pass-through entity, so it's all within the same taxpayer entity. Now, because he has a promissory note, he can now place that promissory note in the single member LLC. We can convert it to the partnership. At that point, the promissory note is due. The money goes into the partnership outside of the tax implications of the owner. And all of this $2.2 million gain occurs inside a charitable structure instead with no tax consequences. So this structure saved him about $854,000 in taxes. It had the additional advantage of creating a $600,000 charitable deduction that he could apply against his $1 million of income that he's already taken for the year. Now, with gifting, if you're gifting an appreciated asset and the promissory note is clearly an appreciated asset, you don't get a 60% deduction, you only get a 30% deduction. So we were only able to offset on the personal income side, $300,000 of income. The rest of that was a carry forward for 5 years. And depending on how successful his other companies are, he'll either get to use more of that deduction as an offset against future income, or it will expire. But either way, we negated the tax on the $2.2 million transaction. For personal purposes, he chose to keep the building out of that side of the equation. He wanted the extra amount of money unencumbered. So he just paid the taxes on that. But we could have rolled the building into the same promissory note and negated, that other $100,000 of gains as well. But that was what he and his trusted advisor decided to do. So that's how we did that piece. Questions, thoughts?
John, there are no questions in the chat, but here's a little question I have for you. If I understood you correctly, you said that you cannot use an S corp with a charity as you would a CLLC. I know that you can switch between S and C corps, and you can take an LLC and convert it to an S corp. Could you go the other way around from an S corp and convert it to an LLC and then be able to accomplish that end goal?
Maybe. That declaration has to happen in January. So, with a closed schedule for the second half of the year, converting the ownership structure was not an option for us.
Okay, thank you.
So, yep. So we
Yeah,
had to figure out a workaround. Go ahead, Dane.
Yeah, and I'm not sure you can go from S to LLC. You can
I
go
don't
from
think you
LLC
can.
to S.
Yes.
Yeah, that was my
because- yeah,
thinking
because
also.
But even if you went from an S to a C corp, Dane, an LLC can own C shares.
Right.
So you could have done a reclassification of the business if we had been involved on the front end getting ready for this sale. And ironically, we had a preliminary conversation with him in the fall of the prior year, and then he went dark on us until September. So,
Yeah, and I know you can specify an S corp when you originally create the LLC, because the LLC is just a state entity. It's not a federal,
Right.
determination. But I'm not sure that once you've established the LLC as a partnership, then it's just like any other partnership. I'm not sure you could reclass back to a
right.
back to partnership.
And we were not talking about, I was not talking about reclassifying the charitable structure, but rather the business structure before we listed it. So,
Yeah.
in January, we could say, we don't want to be an S corp anymore. Now we want to be a C corp. And then you could have gifted the shares of the C corp to the partnership.
Mhm.
But, he went dark on us, so there's not much we can do about it until after the fact. And that happens more times than I care to admit, in that business owners are really good at what they do, but they don't understand the ramification of time on some of our planning decisions.
Mhm.
I mean, that's not their space. And clearly I didn't do a good enough job in helping him to understand, the necessity for us to be able to, plan these things out and make these decisions. And frankly, when we left the conversation in the fall, the understanding was that he was going to hang on, he was going to continue to grow the business for another year or two and then sell it. And it turned out that 7 months later, he decided to sell it. So, so the way that, it's just 4 minutes before 1, and hallelujah, Dane, I think for the first time, we're going to finish on time.
Uh-huh.
So what's going to happen, once we hang up from this, you are going to receive a survey, and the survey is just going to have 3 questions on it. I think I can't even remember the address. The address was listed on your registration, but that's where you put your keywords in. The system is kind of finicky, in that if you don't have, and I don't remember whether we loaded the words capitalized or not, but it will automatically score. And depending on if you had the spelling exactly the same as we entered it, it will come back and tell you got 100%, or it'll come back and tell you failed. Don't stress about it, because we manually review all of the surveys, and we will override the failure if you misspelled a word, or we used a capital and you didn't capitalize. That's not a concern. The certificates are scheduled to go out a week from Friday. So we'll do, we'll review them tomorrow, or we have a week to review them. And then next Friday, you'll get your certificates. And on that note, the only other thing I want to say is that, you folks do have mine and Dane's contact information. If you have, if you want to have a one-on-one conversation about any of the cases we talked about here, or any of the strategies we use, feel free to reach out to us. This webinar was recorded, and you will receive a copy of the recording of the webinar as well. So on that note, folks, thank you so much. I appreciate the hour you spent with us, and I'll look forward to talking to you again soon. We are not hosting a webinar in October because of the big tax deadline. We will be picking these up again in November. Dane, Ted, thanks as always for your help. Couldn't do it without you.
Glad to
Thank you.
participate.
Bye now.